An original.
From Story Studio Network.
Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
All right, here we are. It is the 12th day of July, 2024. Boy, we're already making the turn halfway through July. What the hell? It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. Dave Trafford here with John Wright and Keith Leslie. And, we just, we're just shy of having to build the Ark in this part of the world. We had a bit of rain here. Holy lightning. It was crazy here in Toronto. But it's summer in southern Ontario, so we'll take it. I was suggesting yesterday that I spend too much time in this room, which is a windowless, studio. And every once in a while I poke my head up and think, oh, yeah, I should just put every tools down or work out in the backyard or something else because you forget. And we don't often get this kind of weather in this part of the world, and it seems to catch me by surprise every summer. So hope y'all are enjoying your summer vacation, and we'll get into summer in Ontario on the way. But 2 weeks ago, Keith and I were on here, and it was the morning after the disastrous debate. So if you don't mind, we're going to start with that today because we had the G7 and now just more recently the NATO meetings and, everything in between. And every day seems to be the most important day. I'm putting this in air italics, the most important day in U.S. American politics. And the Democrats are just fumbling over themselves and hoping that Joe Biden is going to pull this one out of the fire. Well, yesterday, he wrapped up the NATO summit in Washington, on this note.
And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin.
What concerns do you have about Vice President Harris's ability to beat Donald Trump if she were at the top of the ticket?
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she's not qualified to be president.
John Wright, you're the numbers guy. I don't know what you do about this. I mean, it's easy to say, oh, yeah, we all fumble over names now. Every time he does this based on the benchmark of the debate, it just drives another nail.
Yeah, but he's in charge of the hammer, or at least his wife is. So I don't know, whether all of these other people banging on a board is going to do anything. We'll have to see. Secondly, I watched both of those performances, and it's not only disappointing, but you realize everybody else is watching those performances to make sure that they can parse these things here and there. There are two things to say about this, maybe three. Number one is the polling that I respect the most is back as of last night, and it shows 37% of Americans think he should stay in this race. That means that, you're looking at close to 2/3 of Democrats who are not on board. So that's number one. Voters have decided that this is, where they stand. And there's a process issue, obviously, that the Democrats have to think about. But nonetheless, they are having some real problems among the electorate. They need desperately to beat Donald Trump, especially in the swing states where Donald Trump is now leading in 5, I think, of the 7. Number two, the coattail effect of the president is real. And so you're going to have senators and governors and everybody else who are now suddenly looking at their prospects and saying, I'm going down the tubes. I can't energize my people, nor am I going to be able to take, the glow of the presidency and move it forward. So that's a serious problem, and those people are going to become far more vocal. Number three is really about how you make these decisions and how you actually have a replacement, because it's not as simple as as kind of like, okay, I resign. It's over to you, Kamala. We have a convention coming up. I mean, he could go to a convention, I suppose. I don't know all the pieces of it, but release all of his delegates and say, go vote for whoever you wish, and they get somebody new in there. On the other hand, Kamala Harris has the black vote that they've got to get and hold on to, which they currently are having some problems with. So, look, this is incredibly problematic. But it comes down to one thing, and that is you have to have had an anticipation of this many, many months ago, if not longer. That this is a president who now we know sits in scripted cabinet meetings. You can only ask these questions, and these are the answers you're going to get. And I, when I know that the Trump folks are all ready to go, the Heritage Foundation with their policies already laid out in 600 pages, which to the normal observer who likes democracy goes, this is over. Like as soon as they go in, they have a plan. I mean, the Trump White House got through the front door and said, geez, we didn't expect to be here. I wonder what we're going to do. Now they have a plan. And the plan is to basically get rid of the checks and balances in the United States, centralize it, make most of the machinery of government political appointees as opposed to government appointees, and to just have it dominated by somebody who likes to hang out with people who are dictators. So this all is complicated, but it comes down to, as I said at the outset, Joe Biden, and the family. And if they don't want to go, then there's nothing you can take away from them unless you decide you want to pull out the amendment in the Constitution that says he's not competent to hold office, and that's not going to happen anytime soon. So the fate of the world, the fate of the United States democracy hangs on the ability of a few people to kind of go, I know what he looks like now, but I don't think we're going to be looking at that even a year from now, so we better make a decision and get out of the tub. There you go.
Keith, a year or two ago, people would have heard John say that's just bullshit hyperbole. The sad reality is it's probably understating the problem that they're facing in the United States. And I hear people keep saying, "Well, it's not my country, but we're just watching." Just be careful, because exactly we just saw what happened at NATO and all of the song and dance around Ukraine. If the 2025 project is in place with Trump in the White House, everything that happened at NATO this week becomes irrelevant.
Well, the international reporters that were asking questions at Biden's news conference were all focused on basically the whole world is worried about you, sir, your performance, your ability to be in the job, and the fact that the questions about that are giving Donald Trump a walk to the White House. When you get that, not just from your local, but from the international community as well, because the whole world is very concerned. What about the support for Ukraine? What about stopping Putin from any further encroachments into other territories? With Trump, we just don't know. He said Putin can do whatever he wants. I thought that Biden's performance at that news conference, the NATO news conference, was incredibly strong, way less cringy than the debate 2 weeks previous, way less cringy. Yes, he made a couple of mistakes, and I'm one of those people that also drops the wrong name in at a time. That would have said Putin when I meant Zelensky. I could see me doing that. I can see other people doing that. So the trouble is now, though, every single word that comes out of Biden's mouth is going to be scrutinized. And every little simple slip up that one of us might make routinely, once in a while, if he does one a day, that's just going to be, they're just going to keep stringing these together. And of course, Trump was playing that one last night before the news conference was even over, where he, misidentified Zelensky, misidentified Zelensky as Putin. They're just going to keep making this, and even Biden said, "Where's Trump been?" Because he's out of the way. Because you guys are just literally destroying yourselves. And even Trump can be disciplined enough to shut up when you just let the other guy take himself down, and that's what's happening. So the Democrats either have to, I guess at the convention, if they're going to keep grumbling for the next 2 weeks, they better get every man and woman right behind this guy. Just one hell of a convention to kick them off, or these questions are just going to give Trump that virtual walk right into the White House, because the Democrats are either going to stay home or they have no confidence, or the fundraising is going to dry up. Now, the national polls show Biden a little bit ahead, 50 to 48, whatever the hell they're trying to calculate. It's still neck and neck within the margin of error. But apparently the state-by-state races show Biden much more vulnerable. So the national polls don't look as bad for him.
But they're irrelevant. This national polls in the United States don't mean anything.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So they're touting this. They're touting that he's strong, that he did well. I watched my mom go through the various stages of dementia with Alzheimer's, and I doubt that at any stage, even early on, she could have stood there and taken an hour of questions on international policy or on things she knew, like bingo. But his knowledge, his ability to communicate was pretty strong. His voice is not. It's halting, and his manner is more halting than it used to be. But I thought perhaps it was almost a worst-case scenario for the Democrats that he did relatively well last night. So they're still up in the air. What do we judge? Do we pull the rug out from under the guy? We can't use the 25th Amendment. They're not going to do that. So what are they going to do? It's going to be the pressure on him and on his wife in particular, I think, to just say, come on, the family's got to just say, for the good of the party and the country and perhaps democracy, he should probably step aside. Now, that's easy for a Canadian to say when I have, zero.
But it doesn't guarantee anything. It doesn't, even if he steps aside at this stage,
No.
It doesn't mean that they're going to do any better or worse against Trump. This should have been decided last summer. I mean, it was implied when he ran in 2020 that he was going to be the one-term president. Everybody was a little, what are you doing? What do you mean you're going to run for a second term? That's when they should have put the brakes on this.
Well, I suppose, but we have to reflect on our own situation here in Canada where, 70% want change. And you look at the by-election in St. Paul's and you look at the one that's coming up in Quebec, which is fairly close. And this prime minister doesn't seem to, heed the writing on the wall either. Like he wants to stick it out. There's this crazy thing called power, and you just get comfortable with it, eh? It's a little bit like the Sally Field kind of like, you like me. It's more like I like you. The issue for these folks is, again, twofold. Number one is that when you look, as Keith said, into the heart of the swing states, Biden just doesn't have it. So right then and there, you look at it, and there's quite a gulf. I mean, as I said, you got basically across America right now, some of the latest polling is actually showing, even on the national stuff, that it's well below the threshold he needs to win. So that's critical. I've always been one to say, look, if you've got a runway of a period of time, you can throw new candidates into a situation like in Canada, you'd have at least a year or so to go if you wanted to have a new prime minister. It gives you enough runway to work with. This, you have months. So I don't know what's going to change. But the more important thing is this. When you deal with polling and you deal with these kind of issues, the public itself, think of it as a human body with a mind. And the human body with a mind comes to what I love the phrase, deliberative judgment. There is a period of time where the public, and you too would know it being in the news cycle, that the public actually is open to concepts, they digest them, and then they listen to everybody else around them, whether it's their family or the media. It's something that catches their attention because for most people, none of this exists in their reality. It really doesn't. They have other things they're concerned about. They don't want to know about this stuff. I had a question this morning from a reporter who wants to do a poll on the NATO stuff, and it's kind of like, do you think Canadians will want them to meet their 2% and how much it's going to – it's like, no, we don't – they don't get it. Like, they're just not tuned into that stuff. In this case, what we've gone through is a news cycle of about a week now where there's been this massive focus. And everybody, it's a little bit like Scooby-Doo. They all kind of wake up, and they kind of look out there and they go, yeah, there's something going on here. The public has come to deliberative judgment. To try and undo that is almost impossible at this stage. I mean, you can cut through to your supporters, to your base, whatever you want to call it, but you need the rest of the public to come along with you. And if your opponent can get into slivers of that group that normally support you, and in the United States, it could be the Latino vote, it could be the black vote, it could be a group of other people who, you just look at them and instead of saying, are you better off than you were 5 years ago? You just look and say, is this the guy you want 4 years from now? Like, that's kind of the ballot question that the deliberative nature of politics is about. I think we're at the point, no matter how much we do, and if he has another press conference today or does something on the weekend and he like George Bush Sr. jumps out of a plane with a parachute on him. It's not going to cut it because those people have made a deliberative judgment and then they've gone back to their lives. That is what it's about. So the three of us and others are dancing on the pins and we're looking at this and looking at that. There's nothing that the Biden administration can do to cut through that except declare war on somebody. Send the troops in and then they'll rally around the president. I'm not suggesting that, but you go back in history and you will find in certain circumstances it's something worldly where, everybody has to take notice of something to change the narrative. That's what does it. I don't know if anything less than that can do it here.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you could possibly do to wag the dog today to change those minds. I think you're right.
But your scenario does scare me. If Trump does get a second term, that's how he'd get a third.
Yeah.
I got to stay in office. I got to go to war with somebody. China.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
China.
It may be as simple, Keith. I mean, if you take a look at the Heritage document and even read through its summary, it's an incredible document, and it basically dismantles the checks and balances. It moves
completely.
it to a completely political state. It allows him to turn to his friend
Orban,
who is in Mar-a-Lago right now, and say, look, I'm going to join you, and I'll be there for the next 3 or 4 terms. I mean, this is kind of where we're at. And so Biden, this is the kind of, imagine that it just comes down to 2 people who have to decide this, his wife and him. There's nobody else. There's nothing else.
Well, even again, I go back to the notion that even if the Bidens decide, that Jesus is at the table and says, okay, Joe, it's time to go. The Almighty has arrived. We're going to suggest that you step aside. And he does. It does not guarantee anything in terms of the outcome in November. And again, I go back to the point. This is a Democratic Party problem. They watched this train wreck in slow motion. They should have stopped it then. The idea that somehow Joe Biden's capabilities are the biggest issue right now, it's not. The biggest issue is that they're running neck and neck and losing right now to Donald Trump. So it's not just because of Biden's capabilities. This was a problem going in. Even if Joe was at the top of his game, they were still in a problem situation that they did not deal with. They did not look at it. They didn't anticipate it. They did not do anything to mitigate it or get out in front of it.
They didn't want to deal with it. Even the money people, the Hollywood money people. What did George Clooney discover yesterday that he didn't know 3 weeks ago when he held that fundraiser? Yeah. When they had him in a room, all these rich Hollywood types, and they're donating serious coin to the man. And he says, we could tell then he wasn't the Joe Biden we saw a year ago or 4 years ago. And yet you still pwned up the money and kept your mouth shut until now. Why? Why now? If this was something then, shouldn't you all, when you had him in the room, said, Mr. President, as much as we love you and you clearly were your biggest backers, we don't think this is the time for you. We think, you should absolutely. Why didn't they do that? Why now? Why? What's the impetus for it now?
Except I suspect, like most things, number one, the president has enormous power to grant and to take away things that you might have. And secondly, I don't think you would have ended up with anything different than what you've got right now, right? Like
the implosion would have been much more private, though. When you have someone of that, all of a sudden people were asking him at this presidential NATO news conference about what George Clooney thinks.
Yeah, I know.
Who the hell really cares? But that's the reality of it.
My wife wants to know that. That's for sure.
Now, one day I'll tell you about the George Clooney appearance at my wife's retirement party. Anyway, we'll get in. I'll just leave that hang there.
I'll leave that there. We'll come back to that one.
Yeah, so it was pretty funny. But anyway, I just watched this thing, and again, it's a train wreck. I feel like both of you that we're into this situation where this is going to have an effect on how we live in this part of the world, the business that we do internationally, everything else. And now I think Mr. Trudeau's standing on the sidelines, to your point, John, looking at all of this, maybe only because he's going to present himself as, I'm the only guy who can save Canada from Trump.
Well, yeah, but that's a sorry day, but it may be just politics where he says, let's just hang on until the spring of next year, and I can stand up and say, if you want that here, then you can go ahead and vote. But I'm keeping the distance here in this country from that happening here.
All right. Well, we'll watch this. And if we're back in 2 weeks, I've got the over on this. I think we're still talking about what the hell the Democrats are doing and Joe Biden and et cetera. But we'll watch that closely. Here we go.
It's summertime in Ontario. Even though LCBO workers are on strike, there's still plenty of options for you to buy beer, wine, cider, coolers, and even spirits, including products made right here in Ontario. We've created this handy new map that shows what stores are open and what
and
they
so
sell.
on and so on and so forth. And there's the premier flipping burgers. And I don't know if you guys actually watched the video, but he was the most awkward hamburger flipper I've ever seen in my life for a guy who likes to do the backyard barbecue.
I kept looking for the condiments, but in any event, it was an awkward video all the way around. And it was pretty much a government, the premier and a government saying, don't worry about that strike by our government employees here at the LCBO. There's lots of places you can do that, and you won't have to cross a picket line because we've shut them down for 2 weeks.
Right.
And, by the way, buy Ontario. It's not going to be a dry summer. It's literally almost crossing a picket line in a sense by a government, which governments, in past would never do. It's unbelievable in a sense how prepared the PCs clearly were to have this video ready and have an interactive map ready, but they didn't think it all the way through. Because that interactive map, that's leading with your chin. When you've got 2.5 million Ontarians who don't have access to a family doctor, and the unions and the opposition parties quickly pounced. Where's our interactive map, to get primary health care? Where's our interactive map of the homeless encampments, that we need to... There's just so many things that come back to haunt this government when they do something like that. But, of course, they're undeterred. Well, we'll just have another news conference the next day, and we'll talk about, more of our plans for booze and how it's better for Ontario. And we want to keep the LCBO, absolutely. It's got a key role in distribution and warehousing and all this sort of stuff. And the retail footprint, they're basically, they're telling you, you're in business, you need to compete. But Ford, I think, is one strong foot in this one is, you're not going to dictate government policy. We're not going to back down on selling the White Claws and the other premixed drinks in the corner stores. They're about 7% of the market. You got to, or 9%. You got to compete for it yourselves. You can still keep selling them. But we're not going to let you dictate government policy. And the union seems to have made this ready-to-drink thing because of their spirit-based, vodka-based millennium. They're trying to make this the line in the sand, and I don't think most consumers would agree with that. I don't think most consumers were crying, I need to get my hard cider at the gas station or at the corner store. They could have waited a year for that. But they're also not going to understand the union's line in the sand on this particular one. I think the union needs to pivot to, more job security. So I think it's something like 70% of their 9,000 workers are still part-time. The government's offered to make, I think, 400 full-time. That seems a pretty small number in the 9,000, which would be, my math's terrible, but at least 6,000 and change that are part-time. Come on, that's where you should be pushing your fight. But the government clearly wants to get Ontarians used to buying all their alcoholic products everywhere but the LCBO. And that's why they're not worried about shutting it for 2 weeks, because they don't want consumers, as I say, facing a picket line. But they do want us getting used to looking anywhere else. And of course, there's in many parts of Ontario, as we know, there's agency stores, which are basically convenience stores with a liquor store at the back. They've been around forever. And they're not even in the most remote. There's some in Niagara. They're not that rare in Ontario. But there was no one anywhere going, I need more options to buy alcohol. This is a government priority totally. And so they seem to have forced this strike at the same time as they're paying the beer store, hundreds of millions of dollars to break the contract and be able to sell all this stuff. And it's just a question of the government's priorities. Why? Why did this have to come 14 months early? What's the big push on the booze? And to the point where you're now, I agree, you shouldn't let the LCBO union, OPSU, dictate government policy. But they're clearly worried about what you're doing with the privatization of alcohol sales. And do any of us think that once they get this rolled out, that the corner stores or the big box stores and the grocery stores are going to stop at that? They're going to continue lobbying until they too get to sell bottles of spirits just like the LCBO. And I think that's what the union is worried about. And perhaps I think they have a genuine concern to be something actually to be worried about.
John, I just think this is misplayed by the union. They didn't read the room, period. I mean, anybody I have talked to over the last week or so about this has said, kind of to Keith's point, yeah, I'm getting by. This is not a big deal for me. And back to your point earlier is that I got other shit I'm worrying about. I'm not, I can get a box of beer at the grocery store if I want one, or hell, I could go to the beer store, right? So I just don't see this huge upswell of concern over this. And the union is now, into week 2 of the strike as we speak. There doesn't seem to be any there for them. I don't see them winning this.
Well, it took about 10 days before we all realized that we should be going to the grocery store and getting as much toilet paper off the shelves as we could during the pandemic. It took
now, if we start hoarding toilet paper because of this,
there you go. Well, I'm reminded of that this morning because of some of the photographs of the empty shelves at some of the places. So the first thing is not every bottle of rye and scotch is drunk. It's still there. You have people coming over this weekend. You're going to be able to do it. But I suspect that unless the government changes its tune and changes its role in how it's playing this out, it's going to be within about the next week or so. Government caves, to union. And the reason I say that is that we oftentimes talk about stuff within the Toronto Beltway, and it really doesn't matter when you look at the Ford electoral map. It extends outside of the city of Toronto. So you can talk about all kinds of stuff, and it just doesn't, who cares whether or not, there's going to be a change to city council? Who cares about, zoning bylaws and things? Who cares about that stuff? Oh, well, okay, now let's get outside the city of Toronto. Let's go to Cloyne, Ontario, up in the Ottawa Valley. Let's go into the liquor store. Oh, they don't have a liquor store. They got a corner store, and it's full of all kinds of liquor with an LCBO on it. You can't get in a car and drive to the Ontario / Toronto gin maker that's on a map to go and get what you want. Okay, so this is going to start to suddenly have an impact outside of the city of Toronto, and they're going to look around and they're going to go, I know we don't have wine rack here, so we better get something. And plus, I don't like wine rack. It's going to be that kind of conversation. People are simply going to wake up and go, why is this happening? Because stuff is being taken off the shelves and I can't get anything, so it's up to the government to solve it. It's a de facto withdrawal of service. That's what it is. Number 2, I'm always surprised that when we get into situations with unions like this, that oftentimes the drumbeat is, look, we're being fair and reasonable. We're at the table. We want to do this and this. And they've defined the issue going in against the union. The Ford government has not done that. I mean, it knew this was coming. It moved up the benchmark in terms of when they wanted to get things into the corner store. They know the cost of this, but instead of playing the ballot issue, they're now talking about an interactive map, and it backfires on them there. Whether it's the Ontario Place situation or the Science Center or a series of other things, it's almost like the strategic communications half of the brain doesn't work for this government. You don't have to be a policy wonk to figure this out. All you have to do is say, look, between now and then, there's a certain runway that we have to get to. We have to define in the public's mind why we are doing what we're doing and point them to a reasonable outcome that is being stopped by my opponent, as opposed to we're just going to do this and get an interactive map. And secondly, I'm surprised that the Premier is delivering this message. I'm really surprised at that. Well, maybe I shouldn't be surprised. But there's usually the minister in charge of this portfolio who's out front and who's dealing with it on a constant basis. So the Premier, in fact, has some leverage by stepping away from the table and carrying the two parties together if, in fact, claiming victory. This is where Doug Ford, along all these nodes of policy that have backfired on this government, is always in the front line. He's going to wear this. And I suppose you would say, well, does it really matter? Because, he keeps going through. He's got 41% of the vote and all that sort of stuff. Well, right now, this issue, I don't know how it's going to actually resolve itself, but the government's going to have to cave. I don't know how else you fill up those shelves again in Northern Ontario and other places. But I tell you that the clock is ticking, and let's bet here, by Wednesday, we're going to see movement on this. By Wednesday.
Well, but I think the political play here, though, is back to the when is the election call, and this is part of that. He knows that he wants to get this completed and settled, and it doesn't matter whether he caves or not. He's going to be able to say, I got it into the stores like I said I was going to at some point, and whether or not he has to put water in his wine to settle things with OPSU. Generally speaking, I think most people aren't going to care, but he wouldn't want this hanging in the air, Keith, on the verge of an election. So let's get this out of the way. We'll suffer the slings and arrows here, because once we get to the point where we're campaigning, I can stand in front of, the corner store and say, look at all the great options that we have now because I said we were going to do this and we did it.
Well, from Ford Nation's point of view, from Doug Ford and the whole, OPSU picked this fight. OPSU is the one that went on strike. LCBO's never had a strike before. They've got a new president, a new leader, and who's not a fan of the Ford government, and all of a sudden they're going on strike. It's the kind of thing you have to wonder if the previous OPSU leader, Smokey Thomas, would not have handled somehow, like he did all the other times, back channels instead of these front channel fightings. And I say, drawing a line in the sand over the ready-to-mix drinks seems for a union as a PR ploy, that's one that's just not going to sell to most people, even though apparently they sell something like $700 million worth of these damn things.
So I can see why the LCBO wants to hang on to that part of the product or be able to push it out to the stores, right?
It's the largest growing segment of the marketplace for sure. But as the premium pointed out, well, when people are in buying their spirits or wine there, they can still grab the 6-packs of the coolers. I mean, they're still going to be at the LCBO stores. Mm-hmm. And we all know, let's face it, the LCBO is one of the better retail experiences at anything you're buying these days. They have incredible product knowledge that no one else seems to have at any store. They actually have customer service, where the word service actually means something. So people, I think, are very pleased with their LCBO stores overall. They also love that damn magazine. They know this is a high-end retail production, the whole shebang. But it comes off to a point where I think Ontarians are really liking it. And I think the union, they were spoiling for the fight. They got the fight. And I'm not as convinced as John. I might take your bet. I think we'll see movement, but I think we're going to see the unions movement. I hear that there was a big conference call after Ford's news conference, and that the union members, the stewards, I guess, leaders, were urging the leadership get back to the bargaining table. Just get back there now. The premier says he wants to deal with the job security issue, the part-time issue, and the salaries. Get back to the bargaining table. So that's what I'm hearing, and I think if there is movement, it's going to be the union that moves.
Well, I suppose, it takes two parties to solve this. And I won't rephrase it, I do think that at some point the government is the one holding the hammer and has to decide, it's not going to declare these people essential workers, although some people would hope they would.
The LCBO stores were during the pandemic. But
the thing is, as I said, I'm looking at this from a tactical communications perspective. You have the premier who's carrying this, the premier who's at the cottage, and he's got his, he's saying, before I rent my Airbnb out here, take a look at the interactive map and grab some cheesecake on your way out the door and go get yourself something that's made in Ontario. This doesn't solve it. Tell me which union that you can think of in the history of negotiations with the provincial government that effectively has lost at the end of the day. They're all still standing. They strike. They get their mandates. They go ahead with their members. They get reelected. They move on. It's the government that oftentimes takes the heat for this. And all I'm saying is I'm not sure that this is being played out the way that you would normally play out a negotiation, by making sure what the ballot question is that people are really talking about. And I think you'd have to agree that that's where you want to be. You also, you want to be there saying, this is what it's all about. And we're being fair and reasonable, and the other side is not. And what I think is going to happen is that the pressure's going to mount. There'll be phone calls to the local members and a whole bunch of other people, and they'll just say, I don't care what it takes, just stop this and get it solved. Is that going to solve $700 million worth of cocktails in the corner store? Is that what this is all about? Is it really about that issue? Because if it is, again, I think that by this coming Wednesday, that things are moving. And they may say, yes, we're going back to the table because we've got something to talk about. But the reality is it's the government's role here. It's not the union, I think.
Well, and on the other side of this thing is it's the shiny thing as well for everybody involved, in as much as, they rolled out the second report on the Science Center, and I was really busy. I had to watch paint dry, and I was going to go and watch the grass grow. So I took my eye away from that report. Holy shit. I mean, it was brutal, but they spent the whole, I don't know how long it took them to roll out that.
I sat through 90 minutes of it yesterday.
I.O. and
I sat outside with it. We talked earlier. I sat outside and watched the damn thing.
Right.
Because it was sunny here. But holy cow. Now, if they presented, you were talking about communications, John, which is a key part of what we'd like to discuss here. If they had presented 2 weeks ago, when they immediately shuttered and put the fences up around the Science Center, the report that they presented to us yesterday, we would have gotten in our vehicles ourselves and gone down there and helped them put up the fences, I think. Because it was just, they scared the living crap out of everybody. And it's a minimum, you can't do spot repairs. It's $500 million minimum just to get it up to standard. There's no heating. It's just, they didn't use the word decrepit, the engineers and the civil servants at Infrastructure Ontario, which is what were the Premier used, but they used pretty much everything but. And they just said that the building is just literally unsafe. It needs to be decommissioned. When pushed, what does decommission mean? Does that mean, demolished? Couldn't get a great answer on that. And basically the province is going, well, this is the city's land, so we'll be out of it after this point. We did learn that in addition to moving to Ontario Place, which is, the preferred recommendation in every area except for jobs, they'll lose 33 jobs going down there. But they also, the Ontario Science Center, apparently, I learned this yesterday, I didn't know, they make science exhibits for science centers around the world. They have a fabrication plant. This is one reason why a large part of their square footage isn't on display area, because of this fabrication plant. Well, that's not going to fit in Ontario Place. So we learned they're looking for a temporary location for the Science Center, and then the permanent at Ontario Place. They're also looking for a new permanent home for the Fabrication Center because they want to keep doing that. It's an important part of their business. What we really learned as well, and they didn't, of course, state it this way, is that it's criminal that both governments, the previous Liberal government and this government, just allowed this thing to deteriorate to the point. The bridge, which we all know that connected, the pedestrian tunnel bridge that connected to the building A to B and C, it's where all the electricity and the heating and stuff flows through there, and they can't get at it. It's under just so many. It's been closed for 2 years. Mm-hmm. They can't even put people in there. Like, they've let this the needed upkeep and repairs, and the government responded with, well, we fund them $25 million a year. We gave them $7 million last year for emergency repairs. Clearly, the building was getting to a point. That's kind of, those tens of millions of dollars should have been invested tens of years ago.
It's demolition by neglect. That's what it is.
Oh, it is. It's letting it crumble. Yeah. And, this whole thing about the aerated roof panels, the aerated concrete roof panels, yeah. They were put on the spot at this briefing yesterday. Aren't there something like 600 schools in Ontario with that? But schools have four walls. This is the response they gave us, because they can get at those four walls. The Science Center, they can't get at so many parts of the building because it's in this ravine and forested. And so basically, as I say, I don't understand why the details that were released Thursday were not released when the day they closed.
Well, it was a different engineering firm, right? It was a different firm.
And they reviewed that engineering firm's report. But the conclusions in it were much stronger, and the costs were literally $486 million or $476 million just to get it to a level where you could have people in it again. It just seems that there's clearly moving it makes more sense, or moving to a new location and building a new one. But the whole way it was done and the communications around it was horrible.
My memories of the Science Center are cherished as well. Okay, so I was in the science fair from my grade 8 class back in 1969. There you go. It was beautiful then. I remember going through, it was so much fun. It was such a great place. The lasers and the guinea pigs, I remember them clearly. The next time I went was in about 1993 when I had my first set of kids to go through that. Oh man, that was still, what a nostalgia. There's the same clanging place that we used to have when I was there. It wasn't as great. So I have this memory of the Science Center that doesn't exist in reality. I mean, we all got bused to it. We all walked through it. We all had this great feeling about it. And so there's something that's cherished about it. For those of us that worked at or experienced Ontario Place, it's the same thing. We love to go to the forum. So there's a built-in memory to the public that actually they're holding on to that doesn't exist today. So that's the reality of it. But that means that cherished memory is hard to get rid of. That's what we think of when we think of the Science Center. So that's even from a communications political play, that's what you're playing with. The second thing, though, is I go back to being my regular broken record stuff. If you had been starving this place for all these years, you would at least know you'd been starving it, and there would be a report that could be repaired, and it could have been put out last year. I mean, the motive now, it's almost like, you know, you're getting the evidence to support the motive to move it down to Ontario Place. This could have come from the Science Center itself, as it did.
Absolutely, it should have.
It could have said, look, we're looking for options now because we don't have this. And the Ford government would have looked at it and said, yeah, we're going to take some brickbats for not putting some money into it. But take a look at Kathleen Wynne and what she did, and Dalton McGuinty and everybody else, and it's going to cost us $500 to $800 million to renovate this place. Let's find a place for it and save some money. That would have been easier to do even 18 months ago. But instead what happens is, it's kind of a Friday afternoon, somebody somewhere says, let's get the damn fence up. Oh, now we're going to have the consulting company that built it say, hey, we'll donate our time and we'll fix it. Donors going, hey, we'll get together and put it. You know, I mean, this is like 24 Sussex, right? Everybody's now jumping on the bandwagon. We'll take the asbestos out. We'll do this. We'll do that. And then the report comes out again, you know, on an afternoon, and it may be all relevant and stuff. The people who actually know the most about this are the staff. You know, and they're the ones that have to live in the conditions. Do you really want to live in these conditions? Do you want to work in these conditions? It's a health and safety matter, all of the sort of pieces. So I come back to this and say the problem that we have is that the Science Center, first of all, is linked to a cherished memory of a place that does not exist. We went there in a yellow school bus, and we went many, many times, and it doesn't exist. Number two, you're dealing with that. And you're also dealing with the implications that you said from the outset some time ago you want to move the damn thing because you want to shore it up at another decrepit site. And now you're providing the evidence after that fact that's connected to those two pieces. The only thing that really dislodges this is I'm not saying that it's an independent outside source, but the press conference that was done yesterday, if that had been done 18 months ago, I think it would have been a very different story. And this comes back to the whole point of thinking strategically ahead and not as a retail government. If it's nothing but retail problems, you just think to the next transaction, as opposed to strategically going, okay, if we're going to take down this barrier, we have to do that because this is going to come to play and that's going to come to play. So let's start with the people who work there as opposed to us. And it just doesn't seem to gel.
Well, there was a great series of questions during that news conference yesterday. The chairman of the board, who's a former Conservative MP for Don Valley West, was asked, you know, you donated a lot of money to the PC party, as did over half of the board members. How are we to think that you just didn't rubber stamp what this government wanted you to do, which is, you know, immediately shut the Science Center? Oh, no, we had a vigorous debate. I wouldn't want you, the minutes show there was like nothing. We wouldn't want you to think that from the minute. No, there was, you know, there were definitely concerns, and we talked about them, but we unanimously agreed with the government's decision. So again, it does, like everything else, it just looks like John said, as political justification for something you made up your mind years ago to do. Why didn't you better prepare us all for it and better prepare to lay the groundwork for yourself so you didn't deal with 2.5, 3 weeks of negative headlines? I saw a new dentist a couple of weeks ago, and he said to me, you know, I have no problems with the Ford government. I'm okay with what they're doing. The Science Center pisses me off. And I think it's to John's point. It's the memories. It's, you know, it's everyone who went there as a kid and then brought their kids there. But it doesn't look like it did when you took your kids there in the early 90s. And the heating plant doesn't even work anymore. So I think it's justifiable, but the way they went about it is it just looked like it was pure politics, as usual with this government.
Well, I will leave you with this. And my memory of the Science Center is Mr. Harold Foley. And Mr. Foley was the dad of one of the kids we went to school with at St. Margaret's. And Mr. Foley worked at the Science Center.
Oh, cool.
And Mr. Foley, about 3 or 4 times a year, he would swing by and pick us all up at about 7 o'clock in the morning when he was going to work. And we had the run of the place. There was nobody else in the building except some staff. And my brother and I and Jimmy and his siblings, we'd have the run of the Science Center. We never had to deal with lineups. We never had to deal with crowds. We didn't go on no stinking yellow school bus. we had the chauffeur driven by Mr. Foley to the front door of the Science Center, and we got to play with absolutely everything in there. It was like our own personal playground. Yeah, you're right, John. It's all about the memories. It was great.
And I'll leave you with this. My cousin Mary Hayes started there when it opened. And she was the guinea pig collection because her interest in PhD was genetics. And she went on to work on the Genome Project. And she met this guy named Gary Pattenden, who was in charge of the laser that cut through the cinder blocks. And they got married into the family, and they had kids ever after. So when we went, we had all the behind-the-scenes stuff. I mean, we all can relate to these stories here. And instead of being enthusiastic about where it's going to go and what it's going to do and how it's going to solve Ontario Place, it should always be treated as if it's a great sorrow we have to make these decisions. I'm terribly sorry. You know, we're compelled to do so. So it comes down to cherished memory versus, in two spots actually, versus who's calling the shots and why is it happening. And it's a misstep, but they're going to have to live through it over the next number of months.
All right, well, we'll watch who's calling the shots and if there are shots to be had in the next couple of weeks. So we'll be back in the chair. That'll do it for this week on the Ledge. Back in 2 weeks, your Ontario Politics podcast. Thanks to Keith Leslie, John Wright. I'm Dave Trafford, and this is Story Studio Network.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.